Although it's tall and massive, the Statue of Liberty doesn't always stand still. When the wind is strong enough, she sways by around 3 inches, and her torch about twice as much. And then on calm days, if you look closely at her feet, you can sometimes catch her doing a little jig underneath that flowing robe. Not really. You know, there is more than one Statue of Liberty. A bronze replica of its little sister that served as a model for the New York statue stands in the Jardin du Luxembourg in Paris. Yeah, I never took French in school, but I try. A quarter-size replica of the iconic monument is on an island in the Seine River, also in Paris. There is also a life-size gold leaf-colored copy of the torch on entrance to a world-famous tunnel in Paris. I'm not even going to try to say that name. Back in New York, if you look very closely at the face of Lady Liberty, you can clearly see that the famous statue was inspired by none other than the 50s pop star Elvis Presley. Nah, I'm just messing with you. The Statue of Liberty was designed by Frederick August Bartholdi 60 years before Elvis was even born. People have different opinions about who really inspired the face of Lady Liberty. According to one theory, the model for her was the beautiful Isabella Boyer. Isabella was born in 1841 to a wealthy family in Paris. When she turned 22, she moved to New York to marry an American entrepreneur and became a socialite. The real unglamorous story is Bartholdi modeled the face after his mother, who, I guess, Elvis looked like. Now, another theory suggests that Lady Liberty might not be modeled after a Western white woman as previously thought. As a young man, Bartholdi went on a trip to Egypt, and after seeing the pyramids, he was inspired to create colossal sculptures. Older and more successful, Bartholdi returned to Egypt to propose a new sculpture at the entrance of the Suez Canal. The sculpture was to be called Egypt Carrying the Light to Asia and depicted a cloaked figure holding a torch to guide travelers through the canal. Well, that one cost too much, but he kept the idea in his head until another opportunity arose in New York Harbor. This is what the statue looked like 135 years ago. Yeah, its color is very different. It's the same color you'd see if you cut through an electrical wire, because the entire outside of the statue is made of copper. About 20 years after it was installed, it turned completely green. That's because the air and the frequent rains gradually oxidized the metal into a coating called patina. And that metal is extremely thin. Designers could have made those sheets of metal thicker, but then the statue would have been even heavier and it would have fallen under its own weight. A little thinner, and the severe oxidation and corrosion of the metal would have made holes in the statue. The sculptor had thought well about the construction of the statue, and it took more than 10 years to build it. But it all started with this model, made of clay. It was only 4 feet tall. So you would probably be taller than this mini Statue of Liberty, even with its arm raised. The next model was made of plaster. By increasing the size, the sculptor could add and refine the details of the statue. For example, a detail that you would never be able to see from Liberty Island or even from the pedestal. It's the shackles by her ankles. It looks as if she has thrown them off, symbolizing freedom. The next model was 33 feet tall, or the length of a school bus. That's about a quarter of the statue's actual size, and it was the maximum size the sculptor could fit in his workshop. Then the sculptor proceeded to create the full-size pieces, the head and the hand holding the torch. The other hand held a stone tablet with Roman numerals embossed on it, signifying July 4, 1776, the date of American independence. So, it was time to build the final version of the Statue of Liberty. The constructors needed all the parts of the statue made of plaster first. Here's its head. They took sheets of wood parallel to each other and pushed them against the model. The edges of the sheets then were shaped so that they perfectly replicated the shapes and curves of the statue. In other words, it was a mold. Then, the wooden structure was placed on the floor and covered with a sheet of copper the thickness of a penny. All that was left was to carefully shape the sheet of copper into the curves of the statue with soft wooden mallets and a press. The statue and pedestal together cost $500,000 to build. French supporters raised funds to build the statue, and Americans paid for the pedestal it would stand on. In today's money, that would be over $10 million. The statue was completed in France and then shipped to America, packed in hundreds of wooden crates. Over 200,000 Americans waited to greet the ship carrying Lady Liberty as it arrived in New York Harbor. The statue was assembled in 4 months on Bedloes Island, which is now known as Liberty Island. Now, a mistake might have been made when the Statue of Liberty was assembled. During an inspection in 1982, workers realized that her head had been installed 2 feet off-center. Yeah, sometimes I feel like that too. Shortly down the road, in front of this famous Paris tunnel, is the Flame of Liberty. This is a full-size replica of the flame from Lady Liberty's torch covered in gold leaf. This monument was gifted to France in 1989 from donors across the world as a thank you for the Statue of Liberty and as a symbol of the Franco-American friendship. About 4.5 million people visit the famous statue every year. By comparison, around 3.25 million people visit the London Eye each year. This makes the Statue of Liberty one of the most popular tourist attractions in the world. Almost 100 years after the statue was erected, Lady Liberty's torch was given a makeover. In 1984, the statue's original copper and glass torch was replaced with a new one covered in 24-karat gold leaf. The torch is the only place not accessible to visitors due to damage it previously sustained, making it unsafe to climb up there. The Statue of Liberty is 150 feet tall. That's like 10 giraffes sitting on each other's necks. Compared to the size of a person, you'd have to stand on the shoulders of your 25 friends to reach the torch in its right hand. The concrete base and pedestal make the statue even taller, 305 feet from the ground to the very top. So, let's get inside the thing. We have to go through the doors of a star-shaped base. Then you have a choice. Take the elevator up to the observation deck or go up the 192 steps. You go first. There are stairs for tourists to go up and another staircase to go down to avoid the crowds and traffic. The stairs take you to the height of a 6-story building, right up to the observation deck at the top of the pedestal. To get to the crown of the statue, we need to go to the 7th floor, where we see a double helix stairway. It runs right inside the iron pylons, the spine of the Statue of Liberty, designed by none other than Gustav Eiffel, the Eiffel Tower guy. And this stairway is double because there's one side for going up and the other for going down. And there's also some space where you can rest if you get tired while going up. Yeah, I've done it, and yes, you need it. And you need reservations. As you climb the statue, you can see exactly how the 300 copper sheets were attached to the metal frame. The story of how exactly they did that is riveting. And you can also distinguish specific details of the statue, like the folds of the dress and even locks of hair. 354 steps done. Congratulations! You've reached the observation deck in the crown of the Statue of Liberty. It's pretty cozy up there and only fits a couple of people. You can peer out over New York Harbor through 25 glass windows. They symbolize the gems of our planet. And there are powerful lanterns behind you that light up the glass. They turn on at night so that passing ships can see the statue's crown glow. Entry to the torch is not allowed for tourists, but hey, just for you, we'll open it up for a minute. To get up there, you have to go down. Yes, about to the neck of the statue. There's a hatch that leads you through a narrow passage into the right arm of the statue. Then you have to go up the stairs to the wrist, and then another ladder will lead you to the handle of the torch. Open the cylindrical door and, oh my, you're on the highest observation deck of the Statue of Liberty. For many years now, only workers have been allowed access here. Back at the beginning, this arm stood separately in Madison Square Park for 6 years to draw attention to that campaign until the funding issues were resolved. And before it even made it to the U.S., its head had been on display at the World's Fair in Paris to help raise money for the project. The statue's lamp was originally to serve as a lighthouse beacon, but it was not bright enough, just like me, and the light could barely make it to Manhattan. Sculptor Bartholdi offered to cover the entire statue in gold to make it brighter. That idea would have been crazy expensive, so it was never brought to life. The original spikes above its head got rusty, so what you see now was added way later.
Tourists visit them daily, scrambling for the perfect selfie with some of the world's best-known attractions. But I'm sure you're unaware of these little secrets some of these places are hiding. I promise that today you will look at these world-famous monuments in a new way. Did you know that the Statue of Liberty has a second name? The Liberty Enlightening the World. And what's hidden in a box under the statue, right here? This massive structure stands watch over the entrance to New York Harbor, welcoming travelers from around the world. And there's a lot about this beautiful lady that may surprise you. Designed by sculptor Frédéric Bartholdi, France gifted it to the United States in 1884. That's a pretty nice present, but there was a catch. Already built and much too big to move, it was dismantled entirely, packed into 200 crates, and shipped across the ocean. Then, workers put it back together in New York like a giant 3D puzzle. And though many assume the statue is made of stone, it is not. The outside is actually thin sheets of metal. Originally, Bartholdi wanted these sheets to be made of pure gold, creating a truly impressive sight. But at 305 feet tall, the expense was too great. He opted for copper, a cheaper material instead. The one drawback: copper turns green over time. When the metal comes in contact with oxygen, it results in a chemical reaction called oxidation. The Statue of Liberty was originally the color of a shiny new penny. Not as impressive as gold, but pretty spectacular. For 25 years, it changed to a darker brown. Then, slowly faded to the light green it is today. Because the statue is hollow, you can actually go inside and walk up to her head. I hope you've been working out though. You have to climb 354 stairs to make it to the crown. Though initially open to visitors, the torch is now out of bounds. It was damaged in 1916 and has remained closed ever since. Maybe avoid visiting when the weather is bad. In heavy winds, the Statue of Liberty sways up to 3 inches, while the torch can move as much as 5 inches. I would turn as green as the statue itself. Oh, and it's hit by nearly 600 bolts of lightning every year. Shocking, I know. There's also a secret box tucked away beneath the statue. It contains a copy of the US Constitution, 20 bronze medals, and a portrait of the statue's designer. Another well-known monument takes us over the Atlantic Ocean to Paris, France. It's the Eiffel Tower. And though appreciated now, did you know it was once so disliked it almost never got built? Or that the engineer added a special floor just for himself when the tower went up? Engineer Gustave Eiffel built it for the 1889 World's Fair. At 1,083 feet tall, it's the same height as an 81-story building. Once finished, it was the tallest human-made structure in the world and remained the tallest for 41 years until the construction of the Chrysler Building in New York City. Before being built, the public received a sneak peek of the designs. People were not impressed. They called it everything from a truly tragic street lamp to a belfry skeleton, and residents, along with the Champ de Mars where the tower was going to be built, actually went to court to block its construction. But authorities sided with Eiffel, and the tower was finally built. Gustave asked the designer of the tower, Maurice Koechlin, to include an apartment at the very top for his private use. It offered a 360-degree view of Paris and had a living room, big enough for a table, a couch, and a piano, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a bedroom. Talk about a luxury penthouse in the sky. Let's take a quick hop over to London next to check out the Big Ben. But which part of the structure does the name actually refer to? You might be surprised. Big Ben is actually the name of the bell, not the tower. That's right. You're more likely to hear Big Ben than see it. It's located in the Clock Tower, which was renamed Elizabeth Tower in 2012. And the only visitors allowed to enter Elizabeth Tower and see Big Ben are residents of the United Kingdom. Everyone else can only admire it from afar. Pity. The bell weighs 16 tons, the same as 4.5 hippos, and is 7 feet tall. Not far from here is the impressive London Eye, Europe's biggest wheel at 443 feet tall. Less than 30 years old, it still has its secrets. In this case, they involve the number 13, a little romance, and tortoises. There are 32 climate-controlled observation capsules on the giant wheel, but they numbered them from 1 to 33. What? The reason is simple. Designers skipped the number 13 because of its association with bad luck. Next time you take an elevator, you'll notice there's no 13th floor in most buildings for the same superstitious reason. The 32 capsules represent the 32 boroughs, or areas of London. And it is a top-rated tourist destination, receiving more visitors than the Taj Mahal or Stonehenge. And who knew a giant wheel could be romantic? At least 5,000 marriage proposals and over 500 weddings have taken place here. Not a fan of scary rides? You got nothing to worry about. The London Eye moves at a very slow 10 inches per second, which is twice as fast as a tortoise moving at top speed. The ride doesn't even stop to let people on and off. Back to the United States for this next famous monument, the Hollywood sign. Did you know that it used to be bigger? Or the reason it was built in the first place? Don't worry, I'm about to share all its secrets. Developers S. H. Woodruff and Tracy E. Schultz built the original sign in 1923, creating it to advertise real estate. The two men wanted to establish a new neighborhood called Hollywoodland, and the now iconic sign was simply meant to be a giant advertisement to draw home buyers to the area. They planned to remove it after 18 months. In fact, the original sign spelled out Hollywoodland. The city dropped the last 4 letters in 1949. And now, you can only appreciate it from a distance. Tourists are not allowed anywhere near the actual sign. Standing in your way, razor wire, motion sensors, infrared technology, and alarms. There are even helicopter patrols. Yikes! Let's head north to Canada next, to the city of Toronto. When you search along its skyline, you'll see its most famous landmark, the impressive CN Tower. At 1,815 feet tall, it's pretty hard to miss. But what treasure does it hide in a special time capsule tucked away in its walls? It took a whole year for 1,500 workers to build the tower, completed construction in 1974. 2 years later, it was open to the public. Afraid of heights? It might not be a tourist attraction for you. First, the elevators have glass sides and a glass floor as well. It takes 58 seconds, speeding at 15 miles per hour to take you from the ground floor to the observation deck in the sky. And the deck also has glass panels on the floor. Don't worry though, you're not gonna fall through. They're so strong that they can handle the weight of 35 moose. I wonder how they tested that. When the tower opened in 1976, a time capsule was hidden in the wall of the lookout level. Inside, you'll find newspapers, Canadian coins, letters from children, and a letter from Pierre Trudeau. The capsule will remain there until 2076, and there's more. Mount Rushmore actually has a hidden room behind Abraham Lincoln's head, but what's inside? Sculptor Gutzon Borglum initially had a much bolder design in mind, including moments in American history with the 4 heads of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Lincoln. But his ideas were too ambitious. Instead, he was given permission to create a Hall of Records, a secret chamber that would highlight the history of the United States and any important documents. And finally, what's the secret color-changing magic of the Taj Mahal in India? And the reason is surprisingly simple. The large building can be found in the city of Agra in the northern part of the country. It was built by Shah Jahan as a monument and a tomb for his wife, Mumtaz Mahal. Construction started in 1632 and wasn't completed until 1647. White marble covers the outside of the building and is decorated in jewels like lapis lazuli, jade, turquoise, and amethyst. These are placed to create geometric and floral patterns. But if you look at photos of the building, it doesn't always look the same. The color changes depending on the time of day. It has a lot to do with how the sun reflects off the marble. It may seem pinker at dawn, pure white at noon, and an orange bronze at sunset. Some evenings it may even look translucent blue. A second building was planned, designed by the Shah himself. It was a dark reflection of the original. Instead of white, the plan called for black marble. They never completed it. It's incredible how even more impressive these already cool monuments seem when you know a few of their secrets.
The Statue of Liberty tops out at 305 feet on Liberty Island in New York. It's one of the most famous tourist attractions in the world. With this in mind, all you drone users out there better keep your flying device away from the prized monument. The term drone usually refers to any unpiloted aircraft. It also goes by unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs for short. You can use those crafts for a whole bunch of things, from package delivery to just having some fun. Drones can be as large as an aircraft or as small as the palm of your hand. So, why can't drone users get an up-close look at the Statue of Liberty? Well, because the Federal Aviation Administration says so. Drone flights are prohibited within 400 feet of the iconic sculpture. Without the FAA's drone ban, you might have been able to fly your device close to the statue's head. Here, you would have seen that the monument's crown has 25 windows. The windows are thought to represent the natural minerals of the Earth. New York City does its best to keep control of all aircraft roaming above the metropolis. In the late 1970s, New York City banned helicopters from landing on rooftop helipads because of the dangers it presented. This rule is no longer in place. There are still certain restrictions that do exist. However, helicopters are still allowed to take off and land using one of the 3 helipads in the city. They must fly within a certain speed range, turn on anti-collision and position lights, announce their location on the appropriate frequency, and be familiar with the relevant flight charts and maps of New York City. The Statue of Liberty is not the only monument that doesn't welcome drones. The Hoover Dam, the highest concrete arch dam in the U.S., is also a no-fly zone for drones, just like all other dams in the country. National and state parks, sports arenas, and airports are some other places where you shouldn't take your drone for a spin. Across the ocean, in France, the entire city of Paris is a drone-free zone. So, no cool aerial footage of the Eiffel Tower for you, sorry. If you want to get a closer look at Dubai's Burj Khalifa, currently the tallest building in the world, be prepared to file some extensive paperwork. For those who want to get some fun footage of the Sydney Opera House in Australia, flying drones over Sydney and its Harbour Bay isn't allowed for recreational use at all. Professional photographers and filmmakers can apply for a special permit. You know where there's no ban on flying a drone? Into a piping hot volcano. Now, this makes sense as I don't think any normal plane would fancy the expedition. But a man from Oklahoma was willing to sacrifice what I'm hoping wasn't a prized possession. On March 19, 2021, one of the many volcanoes in Iceland, with a name that's too challenging for most mere mortals to pronounce, the Fagradalsfjall volcano began to erupt. It was going on for 6 months. Magma jets produced lava fountains that you could see even from Reykjavik. A first-time drone pilot visiting from the U.S. had managed to get some beautiful footage of that before his drone gadget met its demise. There are lots of interesting things that people are now using drones to do. One of the more practical uses is to clean windows. One German company hopes to automate the washing of glass facades and roofs using drones, even at high altitudes. Now, there's a chance that some of you watching this video right now may be using a drone to do it. How so? Well, some major tech companies are now investing in drone technologies to spread internet access to pretty much the entire world. These devices are solar-powered and meant to fly more than 10 miles above the ground to provide internet access to areas below it. Real estate moguls also utilize drone devices within their industry for aerial photography of properties. Some of your favorite theme parks are now starting to use drones in their magnificent light shows. In 2016, to improve these shows even more, one of the biggest theme parks in the world filed a patent for drone-powered projection technology. In short, the drones would beam down imagery onto a projection assembly. Imagine some larger-than-life versions of your favorite characters from literature and television being projected in front of you from a drone. Pretty awesome, right? Indeed, drones are now rocking the world of entertainment. With such creative advances in drone technology, including planes that can fly by themselves, that's no surprise. With improvements in drones and video capture quality, drones may totally transform the world of film and video. A drone could shoot a scene without any cameraman. All the right pans and tilts will be pre-programmed in advance. One of the most vital and important uses of drones is assistance in emergencies. The ambulance drone, designed at Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands, comes with an advanced first aid kit and instructs the people nearby on how to use this equipment to save a life. People also use drones in search and rescue operations. They've managed to rescue at least 750 people around the world so far using drone technology. Drones quickly cover large areas and can reach the hardest-to-access spots. These drones use thermal and zoom cameras for searching. Ever been waiting for the delivery driver to arrive with your pizza or a new pair of shoes that you just bought online? Some of your favorite delivery companies are also using drones. Those come with sensors that allow them to avoid obstacles along the way. They land the package safely next to a customer's home or other location and return back to base. They're perfect for non-urban areas. You can use several different types of drones for this purpose, depending on delivery conditions and how big the pizza is. This all sounds very modern and high-tech, but drones have actually been around for a long time. Drones have been helping the Japanese agriculture industry for about 30 years already. It takes the farmer 2 days to do the work that would otherwise take 10 days, thanks to drones. They've helped produce about 1/3 of all rice consumed in the country today. Robots, in general, have been helping us humans for a while now. In 2014, Royal Caribbean, a famous cruise line brand, debuted its supposedly bionic bar. The robotic bartenders made 2 drinks each minute for the guests and a total of 1,000 drinks per day using 21 mixers. Marco Pelle from New York Theater Ballet became the inspiration for the robotic bartender's arm movements. We now also see robots while watching some of our favorite sports. During most competitions, human officials have often been responsible for retrieving the ball when it goes out of play and other game day equipment like water bottles. These human officials can now take some time to get some rest. For the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, Toyota developed a series of field support robots to carry out the same tasks I've just described. The idea was to make it easier for the human officials. The robots don't always want to stay on the sidelines either. In 2019, Toyota also produced an AI-powered humanoid basketball player. The same player made history when they awarded it the Guinness World Record for most consecutive basketball free throws by a humanoid robot. At the 2020 Olympics, the robot impressed the public at the free throw line shooting buckets. And admit it, you wouldn't mind a robot helping you out with some boring chores. Renowned technology company Samsung has produced a robotic assistant known as Bot Handy. The robotic assistant can help the owner with a bunch of things around the house, from pouring drinks at the dinner table to putting away dirty dishes and tidying up after its human roommates. What was that? Yep, robotic dogs may soon replace our fluffy pets. Semi-autonomous patrol dogs that can successfully carry out patrol operations already exist. This means you can go see your neighbors or friends knowing that a robo-doggy is going to keep your home secure. Or, in case you don't need a guard, but a loyal buddy, an AI pet robot will be perfect for you. Those guys can even show emotions. They learn and grow based on interaction with the owner and the evaluation of the surroundings. Kind of scary actually. Nah, I'll keep my dog. She doesn't need batteries. The moai statues have been standing tall and proud for hundreds of years. Once people put an enormous effort into carving these grand sculptures, and then they just suddenly stopped making them. But why? Let's figure out this mystery. Easter Island, located 2,500 miles east of Tahiti, has an area of 63 square miles. To this day, it's one of the most isolated islands in the world. Once it was covered with forests, filled with different trees and ferns. But when the first humans came to the island around 400 CE, the forest slowly began to disappear. And starting from 1250 CE, moai statues began appearing all over the place. People made them from different types of rock: compressed volcanic ash, basalt, trachyte, and red scoria. As it's a volcanic island, these were all the ingredients the creators of the statues had to use. And once the builders completed their work, they covered the statues with pumice. The faces of the statues are different, but they all have distinct expressions, with heavy brows and large noses. Their arms are carved into the body. Some have hats on top of their heads. There are nearly 900 statues all over the island. They differ in size. The average height is 13 feet tall, and the largest ones reach 33 feet in height and weigh up to 82 tons. Because the statues have so many different faces, there are theories that they represent and honor ancestors, chiefs, and other important people who lived on the island. But without any clear evidence, it's almost impossible to figure out the true purpose of the moai. Once they stood beautifully along the coast, watching over people in settlements, and their backs faced toward the spirit world of the sea. When Europeans first discovered the moai statues in the 1700s, many of them had already toppled over, and the construction of statues had stopped way earlier than that. Huge amounts of effort were put into making these things. Expert craftspeople spent a great deal of time slowly carving the statues with basic picks. A team of up to 6 people would work hard for an entire year to make just one statue. Then they often had to transport it to its special place on the island, as far as 11 miles. With the help of carbon dating, experts have managed to figure out that the statues started to appear in 1250 CE. And then, suddenly, in 1500 CE or so, the process just stopped. The creators of the statue just left their stone chisels where they were last used, and only a quarter of all the statues were actually placed where they were supposed to be. Half of them still remained in the quarry, while others were left on the ground mid-transit. Something happened on the island, and it caused everyone to just lose interest in the statues. There are many theories around why it could happen, and they mostly relate to deforestation. Islanders may have used wood to move the statues across the island. They possibly did this with the help of sleds and ropes, or even used logs to roll the statues or canoes to float them. The wood started to deplete eventually. Trees on the island took very long to grow, and rats ate most seeds. People had many uses for wood, and they needed it not only for practical things, but also to create other statues. Another reason why the inhabitants of the island could have stopped building the statues might be that they were busy with other projects. Specialized rock gardens were becoming more common with a growing population. They were great for the soil, keeping it warm and fertilizing it at the same time. Islanders spent much time and effort making these rock gardens, and there simply wasn't enough time to focus on building and moving the statues. Another theory suggests that what people believed in changed over time. Supposedly, the islands once saw the statues as a connection to their ancestors. After some time, though, rituals depicting a show of strength and endurance became more widespread. And with these rituals, islanders started to carve images related to seabirds. Seabirds became the main animal on the island. People started to believe that their ancestors looked over them through birds instead of the statues, so there was no longer a reason to build the moai. Anyway, these theories might be true, but the main problem was that the small island couldn't support a growing population. What was once a lush land covered in forests quickly became a barren landscape. For the first few centuries, people relied on forest resources, but agriculture became more important sometime after 1550, when forests disappeared. Tribes that once worked together to build the fantastic monoliths focused on competing against one another instead. During this struggle for land and resources, the moai statues were toppled over because people wanted to reduce their significance. Over the following centuries, all the statues were pushed over, but not all of them deliberately. Many fell naturally after being neglected for so long. Some even ended up in the ocean water surrounding the island, and there they sat for a while. But there was some good news for these statues. They were re-erected, providing a great experience for visitors from all over the world. If you make a journey all the way to this isolated island, the first question you'll probably ask will not be how the statues were made or how they were moved. It will be, how on earth did anyone even make it here in the first place? It was one of the most amazing feats ever. The Polynesians sure did some pretty extraordinary things. From as early as 1500 BCE, these boat-faring people began to explore their world. They used the most advanced marine inventions of their time. They sailed across the ocean in catamarans and outrigger boats, starting in Southeast Asia and inhabiting many more places throughout the Pacific. They lived as far north as Hawaii in 900 BCE and all the way to the south in New Zealand by 1200 BCE. And the farthest journey to the east was, of course, Easter Island. In only a few hundred years, these early sailors inhabited an area of thousands of square miles. They simply memorized where they had already been, and this way managed to navigate the ocean. They used a wide range of techniques. They watched the sun as it rose and set during the day. Stars helped them at night. If it was overcast and sailors couldn't figure out direction visually, they used other brilliant methods. They watched the movements of ocean currents and wave patterns and paid attention to bioluminescence in the water. These patterns helped them find where specific islands were located. These seafarers even understood how islands and atolls in the distance caused air and sea interference patterns. Birds provided them with certain signs too. Some of them migrated long distances from one island to another, which gave travelers some kind of a visual connection for their route. Other types of birds had specific feeding times. Sailors knew when and where they hunted and directed their boats depending on where these birds fed. Vikings certainly get way too much credit for their seafaring abilities. Where they used a sun compass, the early Polynesians relied purely on the knowledge of how nature itself could guide them. Their skills were so advanced that in 1769, Captain James Cook, an English explorer, even hired a Polynesian navigator because of his extensive knowledge of the seas. But even more surprising was the fact that he drew a map from memory. It covered an area that was 2,000 miles wide. In this region, there were 130 islands, and the navigator knew 74 of those islands by name. At the beginning of their voyage, Captain Cook often disregarded the navigator's advice. But toward the end of their journey, he was very impressed. He also recognized the Polynesians as possibly the most widespread nation on Earth.
They used to call this island the Paris of the East, mostly because it had beautiful buildings with large gardens and impressive stone archways. But now, it's nothing like it used to be, with all the architecture almost entirely covered in tree roots and vines. Ross Island is a small territory in the Indian Ocean. It's located east of the Indian city of Port Blair. Though initially thought of as a jail, Ross Island eventually became a luxurious resort for the local administrators. They called this island a real treat for its more privileged residents. It boasted opulent bungalows, stained glass window panels brought all the way from Italy, neatly kept gardens, tennis courts, and even swimming pools. Soon after the complex was closed in 1937, a powerful earthquake hit the island. It caused a lot of damage, making it even more uninhabitable. The island is now in the administration of India and has become a tourist attraction for people interested in abandoned towns. Pieces of German architecture still lie hidden in the Namibian desert. The city of Kolmanskop, Namibia, was a luxury location at its peak in the early 1900s when German workers settled here looking for diamonds. This abandoned town used to have everything from a ballroom to a hospital and even a bowling alley. It all started to decline somewhere in the late 1910s when another diamond-packed location was found nearby. So, most of the people living here moved, leaving everything behind in search of more money. Kolmanskop has since been slowly occupied by sand dunes, while the hot temperature and low moisture help to preserve the buildings. This ghost town is also available for visitors. If it sounds interesting, you can book a tour in the nearby town of Lüderitz. Another abandoned castle dominates the view in Krakow, a city in Italy. The whole village sits atop a cliff that's 1,312 feet high. The founders liked this location since they knew it would be easy to defend themselves from unwanted guests. But the castle, built in the 1300s, soon became overwhelmed by landslides and earthquakes. Even though it has no residents anymore, the medieval city often comes alive during the various local festivals that take place here in the summer months. The locals also offer tours and tell amazing stories about the location. One of the highlights of the tour is a statue that seemingly came out of nowhere and now lies in a body of water. Hidden away in the Montana mountains, Garnet Ghost Town tells the well-known American story of the West's gold rush. The town's history goes back to the 1890s, when they found a lot of gold in the Nancy Hanks mine. During its glory days, Garnet had almost 1,000 residents. Even though it's in a relatively secluded location, it had saloons, hotels, stores, a school, and other features of a regular little town. In 1905, when most of the gold had already been taken away, most mines were left behind, so only a couple of hundred residents stayed in Garnet. The final straw came in 1912, when a fire damaged most of the town's buildings. So, by the 1940s, Garnet was completely abandoned. It soon became a hotspot for treasure hunters looking for furnishings and artifacts. That was until a preservation campaign started in the 1970s. It ended with the town being declared a historic district in 2010. To this day, Garnet is one of the best preserved ghost towns in the area. Hashima Island is another abandoned location that tells us that when people leave, nature takes over. This mysterious place was even featured in a James Bond movie because of its ghostly landscape. It used to be a well-known spot in Japan for undersea coal mines, as it was opened in 1881. In 1959, at its peak, there were over 5,000 people living here, including mine workers and their families. As soon as the mines started going dry, sometime in 1970, people started to slowly depart the island, leaving it completely abandoned in 3 months. Even though nobody lives there these days, there are a lot of tourists here that drop off to wander around the abandoned homes, swimming pools, stores, and factories. Another town that started with a mining company back in 1881 is Calico, California. People discovered the location was packed with silver, so it soon became home to over 500 silver mines and 3,000 residents. It used to feature hotels, general stores, restaurants, and a school. There was even a local newspaper printed here called the Calico Print. But by 1986, the town had become empty. One of the former locals decided to buy it and began its restoration, making it a registered historical landmark. It even has a museum of the Old West available for tourists. One of the most interesting attractions that were rebuilt is the 1-mile-long Calico and Odessa Railroad. It currently goes through the steep canyons and hills, and even passes the old mines and buildings north of Calico. Approximately 1/3 of the town is original, while the rest consists of newer buildings that are replicas meant to recreate the spirit of its past. If you're a fan of cars, you might have heard of Henry Ford as the famous American industrialist who founded the Ford Motor Company in 1903. But in 1927, he began working on another one of his ambitious dreams, Fordlandia. It was supposed to be a massive rubber plantation located near the Tapajos River in Brazil, since he needed a reliable source of rubber for his car tires and hoses. His vision was to design a town complete with swimming pools, a golf course, living bungalows, and even weekly square dancing sessions for the locals. This project was unfortunate to begin with, since the local rubber trees soon got infected with leaf fungus. Even though Henry Ford invested a staggering $20 million into this potential income source, the town failed to produce the needed rubber. He had nothing left to do but to sell it to Brazil in 1945, and soon it was completely abandoned. Many of its buildings are still standing, but have been taken over by the surrounding nature. You can still see curious tourists wandering through it to this day. During its glory days, Hampi was the second largest city in the world. Looking at its ruins today, it's hard to imagine this Indian city used to be filled with temples and bazaars, and that it served as an important center of the Mauryan Empire in the 14th and 15th centuries. It was destroyed in the 16th century, but it still has beautifully preserved forts and markets. It became part of the UNESCO World Heritage in 1986, aiming to protect its buildings, such as the Lotus Mahal, a stone structure that was carved to resemble a lotus flower opening to the sun. A tourist village was constructed back in 1920 along the shore of Epicuén, a salt lake about 370 miles southwest of Buenos Aires in Argentina. It was designed to provide people with a busy city life a breath of fresh air near the restorative salt waters of the nearby lake. It was soon equipped with a railroad station and ended up having a population of more than 5,000 residents. The project was also destined to fail soon enough, as the unusual amount of rain at that time caused Lake Epicuan to swell. In 1985, the water took over the local dam, and the town was flooded. The waters were so deep that they even reached a depth of 33 feet in 1993. They only began to recede in 2009 and left behind the remaining buildings, literally encrusted in salt. No one came back to the town except for Pablo Novak, who returned here back in 2012 and was the only resident of Villa Epicuan at the time.
So how come the world is still talking about a statue that only existed for a mere 54 years over 2,000 years ago? What made this impressive ancient construction so remarkable that we're still discussing it? I'm talking about the Colossus of Rhodes, of course. It's considered to be one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, along with the Great Pyramid of Giza or the Gardens of Babylon. There are a lot of mysteries surrounding this ancient statue, but let's look at some of the facts first, shall we? What we do know is that the local Rhodians decided to start a massive project once a Macedonian siege over their island was over. In other words, it was their way of honoring the higher powers for their victory. Using a lot of material left behind by the Macedonians, they started the construction of the Colossus, which is estimated to have taken about 12 years. Most contemporary descriptions of the sculpture agree that it stood about 105 feet tall. Now, just to compare, that's about the size of the Statue of Liberty today, which is 151 feet tall. It may not seem like a lot. I mean, Lady Liberty is currently ranked as the 52nd tallest statue in the world. The champion here would be the Statue of Unity in India, standing proud at an astonishing 597 feet. But for ancient times, that was quite an accomplishment. But is the similar height the only connection between the Colossus of Rhodes and the Statue of Liberty? Not really. We do know that they both also refer to Lady Liberty as the modern Colossus, since both statues were constructed as a symbol of liberation. There's even a plaque placed inside the pedestal of the New York statue, inscribed with the first verse of the sonnet, "The New Colossus," not like the brazen giant of Greek fame. To build this massive Colossus statue, they sure needed a lot of bronze. Some ancient records even recount that the construction required 27,000 to 29,000 pounds of bronze. Even for modern times, this is a lot, but back then, they even called it an operation that involved the bronze industry of the entire world. The man tasked with bringing the statue to life was Charles of Lindos, a local Greek sculptor. The whole construction took place from 294 to 282 BCE, but unfortunately, Charles never got to see the end result. We don't know for sure why that happened, but some records claim constructing the Colossus of Rhodes may have led him to complete bankruptcy, since he failed to accurately estimate the cost for the massive statue. Anyway, we still don't know for sure how it was possible to build a statue this big back in those days. They had none of the equipment we have today, like excavators or elevators. Some old records said that they had to invent a completely new, custom method to build it. It all happened on the location, put together piece by piece. They supposedly split the statue into many different sections, and the first one to be constructed was the feet. Once each section was done, huge mounds of earth were placed around it, so they could continue working on the next section above. However, these records were made more than 100 years after the Colossus was finished, so there's little we can say about the accuracy of this information. In all those 12 years, the local Greeks worked around the clock to build the Colossus of Rhodes. They started with a white marble base that they placed at the statue's feet. They then continued with some sort of an iron skeleton, to which they attached the bronze plates. Why did they choose bronze, though? Well, that was more for practical reasons, since bronze is stronger than iron and it can also sustain extreme weather conditions. More so, if you think about it, the statue was located pretty close to the sea, so the air surrounding it would have been pretty salty. That's why they needed to make it out of quite sturdy material. And what about the location? Well, that's something that has been up for debate for a long time. Researchers initially believed that the statue stood with each leg on either side of the Mandrake Harbor, one of many in the city of Rhodes, basically straddling its entrance. As imposing as that may sound, it was likely not the case. First of all, that would have meant the harbor would have to have been closed for the whole duration of the construction, which doesn't seem to match all the other records. More so, after the statue had fallen, it would have probably blocked the entirety of the harbor, which again doesn't seem to be mentioned anywhere. Most recent depictions say that it most likely stood either on the eastern side of the Mandrake Harbor or maybe even further inland. So, what happened to this impressive structure? Is there really nothing left of it to this day? And why did it survive for only 54 years, since it took so long to build and it was so important for locals? Well, as admired and valued as it was to the Greeks, an earthquake took the Colossus of Rhodes away from them. The story goes that because of the movement of the earth beneath it, the statue snapped at its knees and was completely laid on the ground. Nonetheless, the statue still continued to be admired for centuries. The Rhodians refused to rebuild it as they considered it a sign and did not dare intervene with destiny. By the middle of the 7th century, they had taken away what was left of the statue completely. Legend says it took about 900 camels to carry all the bronze away from the location. And what about the looks of the statue? This is also one aspect that is still shrouded in mystery. Even though it was a symbol of the locals' pride in maintaining their independence, they did not use the depiction of the statue for any of the coins they made, even though that was kind of customary. Other art historians do think, however, that the Colossus was similar to other depictions of the same mythological creature, a male figure that had rays of light rising from its head. The position of its hands is also still up for debate. Some say it might have even been holding a torch. We don't know if his hands were pointed straight down or whether the right arm was raised, like in similar representations in Greek mythology. The original might not be here for us to admire anymore, but there are some plans out there to rebuild it. A group of European architects intends to build a 21st century version of the ancient statue. This new construction is planned to stretch 500 feet tall. It should serve as a cultural center combined with a lighthouse. To make sure it won't have the same destiny as its ancient ancestor, these designers intend to use a lot of technology available today. Firstly, they plan to cover the whole exterior of the modern Colossus with solar panels so that the enormous building has enough electricity. They also intend to use modern resources to make sure earthquakes and wind forces won't affect the massive structure yet again. To do that, they plan to build the statue as a tripod structure, made from its 2 legs and a third pillar of support, constructed from the sash draped over the statue's arm and touching the ground. They also plan to place heavy steel support around the base for counterbalance. They even thought of a suspension system that would permit the statue to rock back and forth, making it a bit more flexible and able to resist all the various weather conditions. The manufacturer's suggested retail price on this project is quite high though, estimated at around $283 million. Supporters of the modern Colossus are optimistic as they are certain they can raise that impressive amount of cash through crowdfunding and private investments. The Statue of Liberty is one of the most recognizable structures in the USA and in the world. In 1886, the monument wasn't just symbolic. For 16 years, the statue functioned as a fully operational lighthouse. Tourists at the U.S. landmark can head to her crown for a stunning view of the city. But there used to be a perch in the torch that could be accessed. Sadly, the ladder to the torch room was damaged, making the room inaccessible from 1916 until today. And it hasn't welcomed any visitors since. The weight of the statue can be compared to the weight of an empty Boeing 737. But this is only the outer skin of the statue. The metal construction inside, that is stairs, pylons, and support, weigh another 125 tons. It's like a small train locomotive. And the concrete base underneath weighs an impressive 27,000 tons. That's like a fleet of 11,000 heavy SUVs or 180 of the largest blue whales. And this is what the statue looked like 135 years ago. Yes, its color is very different. It's the same color you'd see if you cut through an electrical wire, because the entire statue is made of copper. About 20 years after it was installed, it turned completely green. That's because the air and the frequent rains gradually oxidized the metal, and that metal is extremely thin. Designers could have made those sheets of metal thicker, but then the statue would have been even heavier and it would have fallen under its own weight. A little thinner, and the severe oxidation and corrosion of the metal would have made holes in the statue. The sculptor had thought well about the construction of the statue, and it took more than 10 years to build it. The constructors needed absolutely all the parts of the statue made of plaster first. Here's the head. They took sheets of wood parallel to each other and pushed them against the model. The edges of the sheets were then shaped so that they perfectly replicated the shapes and curves of the statue. In other words, it was a cast. Then the wooden structure was placed on the floor and covered with a sheet of copper. All that was left was to shape the sheet of copper into the curves of the statue with hammers and a press. The sheets were then reinforced on the inside with iron straps. This procedure was repeated 350 times. That's how many separate sheets of copper make up the Statue of Liberty. But if you put it all together, it would simply collapse under its own weight or be blown away by the wind. And that's where Gustave Eiffel comes in. Yes, this is the French engineer who later built the most famous metal structure in the world, the Eiffel Tower. Gustave Eiffel designed the iron pylon that would serve as the spine of the statue. And then smaller metal structures were added around it. Later, all 350 copper plates of the Statue of Liberty would be attached to it. And here you can already see the shape of the future statue. The metal structures repeat the shape of the torch, head, and the tablet in the left hand. Even though this metal structure weighs over 100 tons, it's still quite flexible. So even now, the fully assembled Statue of Liberty sways a bit. In a strong wind, it can swing 4 inches at the top. Edouard de Lamballe was a huge supporter of Bertoldi's work and encouraged the French people to raise money for the statue. Meanwhile, the American public crowdfunded the money to pay for the pedestal. Bartholdi completed the iconic torch-bearing arm of Lady Liberty years before finishing the rest of the design. The arm was then donated in Madison Square Park to encourage the public to donate to the statue. Fundraising from the American public proved to be difficult until publisher Joseph Pulitzer stepped in. He started a drive for donations and promised that each contributor would receive an honorary shout-out in his famous newspaper, The New York World. This attracted over 120,000 donations and raised enough funds to complete the statue. It took about 10 years to finish the work. It took workers another 4 months to fully assemble the statue on the finished pedestal. The statue is connected to the pedestal, so it can't be lifted separately, and the entire metal structure inside can be seen through the glass ceiling of the pedestal. Although interior work was still in progress, you could already see the statue in all its beauty. There's a star-shaped base on the ground. It's the remains of the former Fort Wood on the island. Next comes the granite pedestal, which has its own observation deck, and the statue itself. Now, let's look inside the structure and try to get to the top. The 7 spikes on the Statue of Liberty are not there to represent the 7 continents and 7 seas, as some previously thought. The spikes stand for sun rays, while the circle is there as some halo. It's like when immigrants arrive on a boat. The statue greets them with "hello" and "welcome." There's also an elevator, but it holds a maximum of 3 people and is only used in emergencies. As you climb, you can see exactly how the copper sheets were attached to the metal frame. And you can also distinguish specific details of the statue, like the folds of the dress and even locks of hair. So, 354 steps done, congratulations! You've reached the observation deck in the crown of the Statue of Liberty. It's pretty small and only fits a couple of people. You can look out over the New York harbor through 25 glass windows. They symbolize the gems of our planet. And there are powerful lanterns behind you that light up the glass. They turn on at night so that passing ships can see the statue's crown glow. Well, actually, entry to the torch is not allowed for tourists, but just for you, we'll open it up for a minute. To get up there, you have to go down. Yes, about to the neck of the statue. There's a hatch that leads through a narrow passage into the right arm of the statue. Then you have to go up the stairs to the wrist. Then another ladder will lead you to the handle of the torch. Open the cylindrical door and whoopee! You're on the highest observation deck of the Statue of Liberty. For many years now, only workers have been allowed access here. There's gold in the metal the torch is made of, but if you look closely at it, you'll see that it's not the original torch that was brought here from France. About 100 years after the statue was installed, in 1986, frequent rains and leaking water damaged the torch, and it had to be replaced. At first, the old torch was displayed as a museum piece just inside the pedestal at the entrance. But recently, a new museum was built on the island and the torch was moved there. A theory suggests that Lady Liberty might not even be a lady at all. Author and the Statue of Liberty scholar Elizabeth Mitchell believes that Bartholdi did model Lady Liberty's face after a family member, but not his mother. Upon studying the statue's face, Elizabeth noted that Charlotte Bartholdi had a slightly different face structure than Lady Liberty. In the early years of his career, Bartholdi was a bust maker, known for his accuracy, so these slight discrepancies didn't make sense. When Elizabeth came across pictures of Bartholdi's brother, Jean-Charles, she noticed that his face bore a striking resemblance to Lady Liberty. The statue and pedestal together cost $500,000 to build. In today's money, that would be over $10 million. The statue was completed in France and then shipped to America, split into over 300 copper pieces, packed in wooden boxes. Over 200,000 Americans waited to greet the ship carrying Lady Liberty as it arrived in New York Harbor. The statue was assembled on Bedloe's Island, which is now known as Liberty Island. A mistake might have been made when the Statue of Liberty was assembled. During an inspection in 1982, workers realized that her head had been installed 2 feet off-center. I have had such a crick in my neck. No wonder I've had this headache all these years. The famous structure is also weatherproof. Lady Liberty is struck by around 600 bolts of lightning every year since she was built. Some photographers have been lucky enough to catch these moments. She's also survived hurricanes, ocean changes, and countless storms. The Statue of Liberty was designed to sway in the wind. During heavy winds, Lady Liberty can sway up to 3 inches in any direction, and her torch can sway 5.
Today we're going to an art history trip. Our main focus is to unravel the mystery of whether or not ancient statues has always been white. We'll visit museums and even time travel to try and get a glimpse of what these statues were really like back in the day. To kick off our tour, we land in New York. We climb the famous steps of the Met, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and walk inside this enormous museum. You walk down the aisle and get to the room where one of the world's biggest collections of ancient Greek and Roman statues is held. Admiring the large array of statues, one thing seems evident. They are mainly white. It makes sense since their primary material is white marble. For centuries, historians, archaeologists, and researchers in general have always taken this fact for granted. Weren't these statues always white? Until recent decades, this wasn't something that people discussed. But in the 1980s, researchers unearthed an ancient Greek statue that was clearly pigmented. This new discovery made them wonder, were all ancient statues painted? Let's take a close look at this work of art. This 3rd century before the Common Era Greek statue was discovered to be almost entirely painted, still in its original form. You don't have to look too hard to notice that the statue still carries some of these original pink colors, with some shades of blue and red paint as well. The thing is, this statue is not an exception, it's the norm. As it turns out, ancient civilizations did paint their sculptures with bright and vivid colors, but somewhere along our historic timeline, this information got lost. According to researchers, pigment in sculptures was a way of bringing their representations closer to real life. We live in bright colors, so art might as well reflect that, right? Right! So let's take a few steps back to understand what happened. So why are our museum's galleries filled with white statues as far as the eye could see? You might have heard of Michelangelo. It's a famous Italian sculptor who carved the iconic David and painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo was one of the most emblematic painters of the Renaissance. The Renaissance was a historical period when European artists, philosophers, and scientists developed a renewed interest in the creations of ancient Greece and Rome. Artists like Michelangelo studied a series of Roman sculptures, like this one, the Laocoon and his sons. They fell in love with their lifelike figures and pristine white marble. The one thing they didn't know, and didn't have the technology to know, was if the colored pigments from those sculptures had faded. After all, they were found after years of being buried or left in the open air. It's speculated that this statue, the Laocoon, had colored snakes and mantles, for example. When the Renaissance artists set out to pay homage to ancient artists, they left their masterpieces bare too. They carved directly onto the marble and left them white, without pigmentation. Probably because that's the way they thought things were done in the old days. The works of Michelangelo and his peers influenced a whole generation of sculptors after that. So this way of doing art traveled to modern times without much questioning. However, evidence of color pigments in ancient statues is abundant. Some researchers show that scholars have known for at least a century that ancient sculptures weren't originally all white. Other studies suggest that this discovery might have happened even earlier. In early 1980s, archaeologist Vincent Brinkmann made a huge discovery. During his time as a student at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, he developed a technology that was able to detect polychromy in ancient samples of Greek statues. Polychromy is an art of painting in several colors. Anyways, he was taken aback by his discovery and confused as to why and how other researchers and archaeologists weren't talking about this. As it happens, the first discovery that ancient statues weren't all that white happened a long time ago, way before Vincent was born. It happened during the unearthing of Pompeii back in the 1700s. As you may know, the city of Pompeii in southern Italy was completely covered with lava after the sudden eruption of Mount Vesuvius. The city was destroyed, but the clouds of ashes that arose from the lava managed to preserve a lot of the city's structure through time. Thankfully for art historians and archaeologists, Pompeii became a digging ground for understanding ancient Rome. Researchers found several conserved frescoes that depicted scenes of daily Roman life. In one of these paintings, an artist is seen painting a sculpture. This fact was recorded by a very famous art historian known as Johann Joachim Winckelmann. He is also considered the father of art history. Now let's take a closer look at another famous statue. To see this one in person, you'll have to fly all the way to Rome and visit the Vatican museums. The statue you're looking at is a classic representation of Caesar Augustus. In case you didn't know, he was the founder of the Roman Empire and the first emperor of Rome. He is important. The sculpture you're seeing is called the Augustus of Prima Porta. You may have seen this before, probably in a history textbook. The thing is, it's always depicted in its white marble form. But according to an archaeological finding from the 1860s, the original statue was way much more colorful than that. According to archaeologists, the statue of Augustus de Prima Porta has a crimson tunic, yellow armor, and a purple mantle. It's important to keep in mind that colors weren't made artificially as they are today. Artists could only produce color from natural resources, so purple, for example, was an extremely difficult color to make. Back in the day, they derived purple from the mucus of a rare species of snail, meaning that anyone who used the color purple to pigment their art and clothes was powerful and wealthy. Well, this looked like enough proof for me that ancient statues weren't always white. But as we can judge by the look of our modern museums, there didn't seem to exist enough interest in the art community to further explore polychromy on the ancient statues. But remember that archaeologist we talked about, Brinkman? Well, he has been collecting data on polychromy since the 1980s. At a certain point, he even began making colored replicas of such statues. The technology used is far from simple. To reconstitute these ancient works of art, Brinkman makes a 3D plaster copy of them. Then he paints them by hand with the help of his wife. To find out which color were used in the original sculptures, Brinkman uses UV light. Certain pigments glow under UV light, exposing traces that would otherwise be invisible. Take this colorful archer as an example. Look at these colors. This piece is the reconstruction of a marble archer in the costume of a horseman. To accurately depict the archer, restorers had to research a lot about the history of the region where the art piece was originally found, since colors have a cultural meaning. That, together with UV technology, allowed for the reconstruction you can now see. It seems very far from the idea we have of what the Greeks would make, but this is supposed to look exactly like the original one. According to Brinkman, we shouldn't be so surprised that ancient Western civilizations used bright colors to depict their realities. After all, the Romans and Greeks were heavily inspired by the works of art of Egyptian civilization, Old Mesopotamia, and Asia. For example, if you look at the famous Egyptian Sphinx, you might be led to believe that it always looked that way, but that wasn't at all the case. Modern studies and virtual reconstructions of the monument show us that the monument was very colorful. The body of the statue is believed to have been painted terracotta, while the regal headdress that circles the head is meant to have been golden blue. All of these were considered important colors in Egyptian times, and it was only suitable to use them to depict a pharaoh.
Phew! You can finally send that last report for the day and breathe out. The weekend is around the corner. But just when you're about to hit send, you're alarmed by the low rumbling under your desk. Is it the light rail passing by? Unfortunately, that's not the case. It's a volcano speaking. What, here? In Arizona? That's right, the ground keeps shifting under Arizona, reminding us that Earth is alive. No panic though, let's arm ourselves with some context. 20 American states have extinct, active, and dormant, currently sleeping, volcanoes. Among such states, you can find California, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. On the bright side, Arizona's volcanoes are dormant at the moment, but it doesn't mean they won't go off in the near or not so near future. Now, how about traveling to Arizona to check the traces of its active volcanic past? They dot the desert landscapes of this state like spots dot a Dalmatian. There are entire volcanic fields southwest of Phoenix, east of Douglas, near Flagstaff, north of Kingman, and near the Mexico border. The most worrying thing about these fields is that even though they're not active at the moment, eruptions in this region might happen every 1,000 years or so. Well, the time seems to be up. The last powerful and destructive volcanic eruption occurred around 1,000 years ago at the Sunset Crater. Oh, this place is worth paying more attention to. And we will, but a bit later. First, we have to talk about hotspots. No, not that place where you can surf the web. In our volcanic context, a hotspot is a place where insane amounts of heat melt the overlying crust, Earth's thin outer layer, and form volcanoes. This heat rises from the mantle, which is located between our planet's dense, superheated core and the crust. Want to see an example of this type of volcanism? Welcome to the Hawaiian Islands. The Big Island has its active volcanoes because, at the moment, it's situated on top of the Hawaiian hotspot. The older Hawaiian Islands were once there too, but later they drifted off towards the northwest. It happened because that's where the oceanic crust on top of which they sat, namely the Pacific Plate, moved. Now, look at the world's ocean basins. Yes, they're literally dotted with islands that sit on top of hotspots, like Hawaii, Iceland, Samoa, the Galapagos. Those are probably the most famous examples. But don't think that continents can't host hotspots. They can, but those are far less common. One of the most famous continental hotspots is, I bet you know it. Yep, the one beneath the Yellowstone caldera. By the way, the caldera is a vast volcanic crater, especially one formed as a result of a massive eruption that led to the collapse of the mouth of a volcano. The Yellowstone hotspot is basically the creator of Old Faithful and the rest of the hot springs and mud pots for which the national park is famous. Speaking of Old Faithful, let's make a small detour and pay more attention to this wonder of nature. It's one of the most well-known geysers in the world. People have been coming from all over the globe to see it for more than a century. The cool thing about this geyser is that the likes of it can only form under very specific conditions. That's why they're pretty rare. Magma under the surface superheats pockets of underground water. The pressure there keeps growing until it eventually pushes the water upward with immense strength. A certain volcanic rock with a high silica content lines the tunnel through which this water escapes. Basically, it creates a unique pipe that can withstand unbelievable pressure and heat created by the water erupting above the ground. Old Faithful was the very first named geyser in Yellowstone. If you come to visit it expecting the thing to erupt every hour on the hour, you're gonna be disappointed. On average, Old Faithful erupts every 91 minutes or so, which isn't that bad either. Plus, you can download a special app which will provide you with the approximate time of the next eruption. But be very careful while visiting and stay away from the site. The water erupting from the powerful geyser reaches 204 degrees Fahrenheit. The steam is even more scorching, up to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. It's hot enough to bake a cake. But let's get back to our volcanic hotspots. Scientists still don't clearly understand why there aren't many hotspot volcanoes on continental crust. One reason might be that the continental crust is much thicker than the oceanic crust, which is about 4 times as thick on average. Another reason could be that most of Earth's crust, about 2/3 of it, is oceanic. This means that there's less continental crust for hotspots to form under. Now, I bet those of you living in Arizona will appreciate the following info. We'll talk about a volcanic field right in the heart of this state, the San Francisco Volcanic Field. That's a massive area filled with over 600 volcanoes. Yes, they're mostly small, but it doesn't make them any less impressive. They're scattered across 1,800 square miles in northern Arizona, a giant territory. Interestingly, scientists are still debating about whether this volcanic field is actually sitting on top of a hotspot. But one thing they agree upon, the volcanoes in this area get younger as you move east. And this pattern matches up with the North American plate moving west over what could be a stationary hotspot beneath the surface of our planet. Cool, huh? The volcanic hullabaloo in that area started around 6 million years ago. So, in geological terms, it's relatively young. As for the most recent eruption, it happened less than 1,000 years ago. The Sunset Crater, which I mentioned before, the one near Flagstaff, is the most famous vent from that eruption. The Sinagua people had to leave their homes at Wupatki Pueblo because of the eruption. That site is now part of the Wupatki National Monument. There, you can see how people lived in this volcanic region many years ago. If you go to explore this area, you'll notice that most of the volcanoes there are basalt cinder cones, small and steep. The Colorado Plateau has quite dry weather conditions. That's why the volcanoes haven't worn down much. Some of the best examples of those cones, like this one, called the SP crater, still look like they appeared yesterday. But look around. It's not just cinder cones. The San Francisco volcanic field also has a stratovolcano, as well as some lava domes that formed from volcanic rocks with more silica than basalt you can find in places like Hawaii. It means they're thicker and don't flow as easily. Anyway, the stratovolcano is going to be one of the most epic sights you'll come across while exploring this volcanic field. Well, not the stratovolcano itself, but the San Francisco peaks, the remains of that giant formation. They stand tall at more than 12,600 feet. That's 4.5 Burj Khalifas placed on top of one another. It makes the peaks some of the biggest landmarks in northern Arizona. They're not only stunning, but also sacred to the Native American people who have lived in the area for many generations. Now, unlike those super active volcanoes in Hawaii, the San Francisco volcanic field takes its time, thousands of years between eruptions. But you shouldn't relax just yet. Geologists say another eruption is likely to happen one day. It will probably occur in the remote eastern part of the field, away from big towns. Phew! And if that next eruption is anything like the one that formed Sunset Crater, it would be quite the show. Lava fountains and rivers of lava flowing. At the same time, the next eruption might not happen for centuries, maybe even millennia. Until then, the San Francisco volcanic field will remain a hidden gem of volcanic history, waiting for its next fiery performance.